Our next speaker is actually a true friend of growIT through various PHP Serbia conferences. Please welcome Andreas Heigl, who will speak about properly handling the pain that is working with Timezones.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. I'm going to tell you a bit about why time actually is an illusion, and lunchtime especially. And I hope you are all not too keen to get into lunch, so should I take a bit more time than I'm assigned? That's not as dramatic as we probably think. So, why is time an illusion? I realized that when I've seen a tweet of a good friend of mine. He starts each morning with an encouraging tweet, reading "Good morning," which is awesome. The thing was, it was right after lunchtime for me when I read that, and I was like, "What's going on here? This is a bit weird." And I said to myself, "Well, perhaps I should dig a bit deeper into that." So who am I? I'm a software developer at a German IT company. I'm co-organizing a user group in Frankfurt, where I'm based. I invented php.ug, which is the map of PHP user groups. There is a PHP elephant. I will have some PHP code, but all what I'm talking about applies to almost all languages out there. If you're a Java developer, I can show you some examples in Java as well. I don't have examples for other languages, but I'm willing to work them out. So I'm maintaining callingallpapers.com. I'm contributing to Joined-in. Those are all platforms that are very heavy focusing on date time information on an international setup. Yes. Who of you knows what that is? This is the first nail on the coffin of Timezones. This is the golden nail that was used in this awesome procedure that marks the combination of the Trans-American Railway. That came from, one part came from the Pacific, the other one came from the Atlantic, and they met in the middle. And this golden nail was the last nail that was driven into that railway line to mark the merging of those two lines. And that is also the beginning of Timezones, actually. Because people realized if we have a railway track that spans such a huge distance, well, what does a railway track need? A railway needs, of course, timetables, because people want to know when they have to be at the train station to get into the train. And when you have such a huge distance, you suddenly realize, damn it, those times shift. Up to that point, the time was measured, well, 12 o'clock, noon was when the sun was at its highest point at that location. And that shifts. And for timetables, that is very inconvenient, because you either have to have one timetable for each of the stations in between, you have to do a lot of calculations, or you find a different mechanism. And so the people then sat together in 1880 whatnot and decided, let's divide this railway track into 4 different segments, and each segment has its own time. So the first segment has the time that is in New York, the second segment has the time that is just 1 hour later, and the third segment an hour later, and the fourth segment an hour later as well. And that was really easy, because people could now calculate the timetable, and they just had to rewrite them for those 4 zones by just adding 1 hour. Awesome. And that meant, of course, that in each village, each city on the way, they now had 2 times. They had their local time, 12 o'clock is when the sun is at its highest point, and they had the railway time. People adopted very fast only the railway time, so the local time was irrelevant at one point. And but that was only used from a company side point of view. They only used that or implemented that only for the use of the railways. But very fast, I think it took 2 or 3 years after that, that the government actually said, okay, we want to use this time zone thing, and because that makes sense. Why is that an issue in the first place? Well, it is an issue because, as most of the people by now know, the Earth is round and it revolves around the sun. And that means that only half of the Earth actually has sunlight, and as the Earth revolves, that changes. So sunlight and night times change on the Earth. At the moment, around this time, that looks like this. So we are in bright sunlight, and Asia and the eastern part of America are in night. So if we want to find a way of getting times in a way that aligns with our life cycle, we need to divide this whole stretch into, well, conveniently 24 hours, because that's how many hours we have in a day. So that looks like this. Looks a bit like a mess, isn't it? Yeah, it is a mess. And I'll tell you in a short time why it is a mess. But basically, the whole world is divided into 24 different zones, 24 different areas that span from North Pole to South Pole. And they are, we decided on using the meridian of Greenwich as the 0 offset, as the main meridian, and spanning out from that, we add or subtract offsets times from the time at Greenwich. Why is that such a mess? Because the definition of a time zone actually is, it is that part of the Earth's surface that by governmental definition observes the same date and time. And the mess comes from that highlighted part by governmental definition. There is no physical definition, there is no reasonable definition, it is a governmental definition. And we all know, well, governments. But take care. What is a time zone? The time zone is a geographical region that shares the same time, the same coordinated time, but there is also a time zone ID. The time zone ID is the identifier for that geographical region. We come to that later. There is also the time zone abbreviation, which is a sum of geographical regions that share the same coordinated time. What is a time zone abbreviation, for example? CET, Central European Time, Central to European Summer Time. That is a time zone abbreviation that spans multiple time zones. One of those time zones, for example, is Europe-Belgrade. The time zone identifier for the Serbian area is Europe-Belgrade. But Central European Time also is observed in, well, in the time zone identified by Europe-Berlin or any other European area. And then there is the zone time. What the hell? The zone time is the time zone, is a time offset against Greenwich Mean Time, or UTC. So that's what we often see as the +2 hours or -7 hours or whatever. That is the offset. The offset is observed, well, the offset, for example, for a CET is the same everywhere. And that will get us later. Is that complex already? Yes? You know what? I can add on top. I can make it more complex. That's very easy, actually. Because time zones are not fixed. They have an identifier that is fixed, but time zones actually change. This, for example, are 2 images of Russia. Who of you notices the difference? Apart from the colors. Well, the Russians have, I for myself think, kind of a hobby. They like to change time zones. There is not a single time zone database entry that does not contain a change in Russia. If you see the on the far right, the red ones, they span different area than in the lower picture. So time zones change in certain areas. And perhaps some of you have noticed this small little area here. It doesn't appear up there at all. That's the Crimean. Suddenly the Crimea is integrated into the Russian time zone area. Which is also important to notice, the time zone database we use is not a political statement. It just uses the usually used information. And on the Crimean, that doesn't say the Crimea belongs to Russia. It just says most of the people living on the Crimean are now observing Russian time zone information. So, complex? Yes? You know what? I can top that. I can even make it more complex. Because, yes, we Germans are to blame, actually. There is this thing called summertime. Actually, what is that over there? Is that a... Oh, no, you don't see that. It's from here, I have an artifact on that monitor, which irritates me. There is summertime. There is actually 102 years of summertime by now, or what it is usually known as daylight saving time. What is daylight saving time? Well, if you calculate back 102 years ago, that was 1916. We were all deep into World War I. And the armed forces realized we need more daylight. So they decided to just shift the whole daylight information, or the whole time, for 1 hour, to get more daylight in the end of the day. To get more stuff done. Well, actually, to save more fuel for the tanks. It didn't work out in the end. But that was the first time that a coordinated daylight saving time was used. And it was used throughout that. Complex, isn't it? Yeah. Sorry, this is PHP code. So you can actually get those transitions. And you see here, we have an offset of 7,200 seconds, which is Central European summertime. And here on the, that's the next transition. On the 31st of March 2019, we are going to shift again to summertime, if those time zone informations do not change due to the European Union now being able to whatever. Perhaps you already all got that, or realized that. Yes. So what is daylight saving time? Daylight saving time, take care, it's not simply 1 hour offset. Because in 1946, I think, in Germany, we said, you know what? Summertime is awesome. Daylight saving time is awesome. But I mean, during the really hot summertime, I mean, can't we just extend that once more? So we actually, in March, moved to daylight saving time, Central European summertime, with an offset of +2 hours to UTC, well, to Greenwich Mean Time at that time. And in May, they said, you know what? Let's add another hour. And so from May to, I think, July, in Germany, we had actually a 3-hour offset. And then we went back to 2-hour offset, and then we went back to 1-hour offset. No, we never went back to no offset at all. So it's not necessarily only 1 hour. No one says that it has to be an hour. It can also be just 50 minutes. There is no definition for that. So you have to be aware of that. And also, daylight saving time starts at different times around the world. For example, in the United States, they have completely different times when they start daylight saving time than we have in Europe. The European Union actually thinks about abolishing the rule that all the European countries have to change to summertime or to daylight saving time at the same time. That is going to be a mess. And in addition to that, daylight saving time starts at different seasons on the hemisphere, because on the southern hemisphere, they're using daylight saving time when we have winter, because it makes more sense there. So be prepared for days with more or less than 24 hours. And daylight saving time can actually occur more than once a year. For example, Morocco last year, they observed daylight saving time from March to May, went back to standard time for June, and in July they started summertime again. Why did they do that? Well, in June, as Morocco being an Islamic country, in June there was their holy month, Ramadan. So in Ramadan, people are only allowed to eat when the sun is down. So of course they skipped summertime for that month. Weird, is it? So, to summarize the summary, time zones are political definitions. And time zones change. This is one of the most important things. The question is not do they change, the question is when will they change. And the time zone abbreviation covers a stripe from north to south pole. The zone time is defined by the offset from UTC, which changes within a time zone, or can change if you have daylight saving time. And the daylight saving time may add or actually remove time to or from the zone time. For example, in Ireland, it is like that the Irish standard time is actually daylight saving time. So they are skipping in winter to, well, yes, not daylight saving time. So it actually removes 1 hour from their standard time. What the hell? That broke a whole shitload of Java applications, actually. And daylight saving time, and this is very, very, very important, daylight saving time does not change the time zone. We are still in the time zone with the identifier Europe Belgrade during daylight saving time. But it changes the zone time, and it also might change the time zone abbreviation. We are moving from CET to CEST, or the other way around. You know what? I'm finished with the basics. Are you still with me? Kind of? Okay, fine. So I have prepared some code, actually. It is PHP code. For some of you, I'm sorry about that. But you have to get through that. And actually, PHP has one of the most advanced daytime handling capabilities in all the programming languages around. Java finally managed to have a rather decent time zone handling daytime library in Java, since Java 8, which is out for about half a year or a year. So I'm going to show you the examples for PHP. In PHP, we have a class that is named dateTimeZone. And you can instantiate that dateTimeZone class with, for example, an offset. Create a new dateTimeZone object with an offset of +1. When I get back, that's a time zone type 1, and we have the time zone is +1. Awesome. I can also say, give me a new date time zone with CET. It tells me, yes, this is a time zone type 2 with time zone being CET. And I can say, give me a date time zone object, Europe Belgrade. Time zone type 3, Europe Belgrade. Why is there a difference? Why is that important? Because I can reverse that. I can now say, you know what? I created a time zone object. Can you give me a location for that? When I use Europe Belgrade, of course I can give me a location. It gives me a country code, gives me a latitude, gives me longitude. Awesome. Perhaps a comment. Cool. Do I get that when I use a time zone abbreviation? It can't. Because Central European time, where am I? Well, of course, it could give me Europe. Awesome. So the middle of Europe or whatnot. And the same with an offset. I don't know, where am I? From North Pole to South Pole? Yes, it could give me about 15 degrees east and 0 degrees north or south, because I'm on the equator. So I'm right in the middle. Awesome. That doesn't make sense to get a location for that. And this is very important. If you use an offset, or if you use a time zone abbreviation, you have lost certain information. If you use the time zone abbreviation, the time zone identifier, like Europe Belgrade, you have not only a time zone information, you also have a geographic information. And that is important. And as I said, time zone informations change. You should always make sure that you have the latest time zone information. Currently, that is the 7th revision of the 2018, so I think that's 10 days ago or something like that. That was the last revision we got. That is very important, because sometimes there are even last-minute changes. Sometimes there are changes that are ratified by a government one day before the time zone database is actually released. Sometimes there are changes that are ratified one day after, which usually means, okay, within 2 or 3 days you get a new revision. Awesome. So stay current. In PHP, you can either use update the time zone DB package, or you can update your PHP version. For any language, actually, have a look at iana.org Timezones. You get the latest information. You can download the time zone information there, which is very important, actually. So, how do we handle datetimes in PHP? Which is a bit of PHP code, PHP example code, but also applies to all the other languages out there. Please do not rely on the server time, because you do not know what time zone the server is actually living in. Usually that is UTC, which is fine, but your sysadmin might think, oh, you know what, Europe Berlin is a cool time because the server is standing in, I don't know, Russia. What? Just because it's a German company supporting that server. And always use datetime, the datetime object, with the time zone information to create your datetime objects for user-related dates. If you have server-related dates, like log entries, like creation date, like change date, something like that, use UTC. It makes your life easier. And I come to the question whether to change everything to UTC in a minute or two. And in PHP, use datetime immutable because it saves you a headache. So how do you do that? How do you handle datetimes in PHP? You create a datetime zone object with Europe Belgrade, and then you create a datetime immutable object with the current time information and that time zone object. And then you can print out what we have in there, and yeah, no wonder it's the 2nd of December 2018, 12 o'clock, with an offset of +1. And now we can get any other time information we want from that by just saying, you know what? Set the time zone to something completely different. And then format that again. And now we get, for America Phoenix, for example, we get, yes, it's still the 2nd of December, but we are at 4 o'clock in the morning with an offset of -7. 4 + 8 gives 12, yes, correct. So that's the way how you transfer the time zone information. Be careful, especially in PHP, you can do this actually. You can create a new datetime immutable just with the string A, because we try to be clever in PHP. And it will actually create you something and tell you, yeah, it's the 2nd of December, 12 o'clock with an offset of +1. If you try that with just a B as a string, that works as well. Gives you an offset of 2. If you try that with J, it throws up. Why is that? Who of you has an idea why is that? Well, have you ever heard of Zulu time? Zulu time is the NATO information of this is UTC. And there is also alpha time, Bravo time, Charlie time. So alpha time is, this A is actually a time zone identifier A for alpha time. And you can use B as a time zone identifier for Bravo time. But there is no J. So now you tell PHP, in this case, create a datetime immutable object with a time zone that doesn't exist. Yeah, okay, I'm not doing that. Most important question I always get, how do I store datetimes? How would you store datetimes? Most of you probably convert to UTC, store it as datetime in MySQL or whatever. I would advise you, for user-related dates, to use two fields, two actual database fields. Use one that contains the datetime information, your local datetime information, or the UTC information. And the second one, a string one, that actually contains the time zone identifier of your local time. So for this example, a few slides ago, you would say, OK, I have one datetime object that stores 2018 12/2 T 12:00:00, no offset. And the second field would store Europe, Belgrade. And then you can do something like this. Insert into event, values, datetime, time zone, and you get the time zone information, and you get the datetime information. And just store it in the database. Fine. And then you can grab that from the database and create your time zone or your datetime object from that. You have the local datetime information, and you have your time zone information. Awesome. So I have everything, again, back where it belonged to. Yes. But most of the time, people then say, yeah, that's nice. But now I have to do time comparisons within my code, which is not that nice anymore. But there is a cool thing. MySQL, for example, can actually do time zone transformations on the fly for you. You have to make sure that the time zone information of MySQL is actually current. So make sure you have the correct time zone data. And then you can do a nifty thing like this. You know what, MySQL? Select me everything from the table where, oh, date format, convert from time zone. Convert the time zone from my current local information to UTC. And then give me everything where the hour is larger than 14. And in such a way, I get all the information, all the events, or whatever I've stored in there, where the UTC time information is more than 14. As that is done on the fly, and I'm using always the current time zone information, I always have the information from the current time zone information. So no matter whether the time zone changes in between, you will always have the right information. Why is that important? Because when you store your date times as UTC, you're converting your local time information to UTC with the information you have at this point in time. Well, so I'm now converting a date to local time, to UTC with the local information I have. But the time, the date, the event actually takes place in, let's say, 6 months' time. Within those 6 months, the time zone information changes for that place. So suddenly, my calculation that I did is not correct anymore. But I can't revert that because I have lost that information. Actually, that query is not that optimal because it does a full table query. So you might perhaps want to do some different tricks, like having a UTC field in your database, but that UTC field in your database is updated every time the time zone database updates. And so you grab your local information and convert that with the current information. We talk about that later. And in Postgres, please do not use datetime, a timestamp with time zone. Who of you is using Postgres? Why should you not use this? Because it does not store the time zone. It stores the offset. And if you're only using the offset, you're losing the information about when is daylight saving time, for example, going to happen or not, or is it going to happen? You just have, yes, okay, I'm a +2. Is that a +2 because we are within daylight saving time at this time or not, or does that change? You've lost information. So don't use it. Also, use two fields, and you can use a similar approach to, on the fly, select all the information that you want by converting it to UTC at the local time, at the local information. How would you try? I mean, that's nice. We now know how to store it. We know how to use it. How would you get a time zone, actually? Is there a reliable way of estimating the user's time zone? No. There is no reliable way. Wait a minute. Any one of you uses Moment.js? Moment.js has this thing called time zone guess. Well, shall we try it? Let's have a look. What happens? That's going to be interesting. Well, also an interesting experiment. Never had that so far. Usually it gives me the time zone where I'm usually in, which is for me would be Europe Berlin. Even though I'm not in Berlin at the moment, it would still give me that because it uses the localization information of the machine, as that is in German. It somehow thinks, you know what, that person always wants to use Europe Berlin as time zone. Nah, sometimes, but not always. So the only actually relevant information, or the only actually relevant way to get the time zone of a user is ask them. Easy as it is. Because you don't know whether that person perhaps now wants to know the information from Europe Berlin from me, or from Europe Belgrade. Well, okay, that might be the same information, but I might be here from the US and might still be time-wise in the US, so I want that information with the local information from where I belong to, where I came from. You don't know it. If you, for example, as we do in joined in, if you want the time zone information for a certain location, because that event is taking place somewhere, then you can actually use then you can use something like this. You can say, give me all the time zones for a certain country. I know it's going to take place in Serbia, so give me all the time zones for Serbia, which is 1, which is easy. How would you do that, for example, in the United States? There is not only 1 time zone in the United States, and they do not only have 4 time zones, they have a few more. So there is another option you can use, which is use an API. There is an API where you can just push, you can pass the geographic location where you are currently in or where that event takes place, and it will give you back the information of, well, which country is that in, but also which time zone is that in, and which offset do they observe currently and stuff like that. So that is the only way to actually know the time zone for a geographic location. So I would actually encourage you to use that. So a lot of people are actually storing the time zone abbreviation. Is it possible to get the time zone from a time zone abbreviation? So for example, think of in Central European time now, so the time zone abbreviation is CET. In about half a year time, the European Union drops all the information, drops all the things about daylight saving time, so everything will change. Now we have saved CET somewhere in a database. Can we get back to a local information, to a time zone identifier? Well, actually, we cannot, because when I query for Central European time, I get 52 different entries at the moment. At the moment. The last time I did that query, it was only 51. So something changed. I didn't check what changed, actually. So there is no way to actually reliably figure out where did we come from. As soon as you say, this is Central European time, you have lost that information. And you are lost. So please do not try to get a time zone from an offset or from an abbreviation. It's not possible. Please do not do funny timestamp arithmetics within the database. I've shown you some examples, though actually that's not what I was talking about here. I think here I'm talking about these funny timestamp things like add 68,400 seconds to a timestamp, because a day might not have 68,400 seconds, because that might not be 24 hours. It might be 23 or 25 hours or something in between. Or have you ever heard of a thing called leap seconds? I didn't even go into that. So use what's available. Don't try to be funny. Do not store the offset in the database. Well, of course you can store the offset in the database, but do not rely on that, because you lose information. Please do not rely on datetime functions of the database. For example, if you are creating a library that might be used on different database types, your users might suddenly think, you know what? SQLite is an awesome database, let's use that. Sadly, they do not have time zone informations, so you're lost there. They do not have time handling information, functionality in there, you're lost there. If you know my application is based on MySQL or is based on Postgres or Oracle or whatnot, of course you can do it. But always be aware of that. If you're programming something that might be used on different database systems, there might be a database system out there that does not support this. Or be very specific on, you have to use this database type. And please do not convert datetimes to UTC. At least when we're talking about event information that might happen anywhere from tomorrow to wherever in the future. But please do use UTC for logging information, because apart from very, very, very few occurrences, you know how to convert today's date to a timestamp. So that's perfect. Please do store datetimes without an offset as local time. Do store time zone identifier, the time zone name, along with that information in a second field. You can, of course, omit that for UTC. I mean, you know that is UTC because it's the logging information. And please use Moment.js, for example, for rendering. Don't do the rendering in your backend. Do the rendering in the front end. Just pass them the information you have, datetime, time zone information, time zone ID, and Moment.js will figure out all the other things. That's awesome. And please, if you want to display time zone names, like Europe Belgrade, most of the users are very unfamiliar with that term. Use the ICU informations to display time zone names, so that the user just selects which time zone are you in. That's a bad idea, because a lot of people are not aware of what is the difference between the time zone abbreviation and the time zone identifier and the offset and whatnot. What is your nearest city? Belgrade. Okay, Belgrade, that means time zone identifier is Europe Belgrade. That's much easier for the people. And in the end, that's what it more or less boils down. Daytime without a time zone is a bit like currency without is a bit like money without a currency. Yes, that costs you 12. What? Dollars? Or dinars? It makes a difference somehow. Any questions? Because I see I even have time left. Well, if you don't have questions, I have a few links here. Especially note the last one. There's also a question I very often get. What about time on Mars? People already thought about that. So if you're into that, have a look. No, there is no politics on Mars. The thing is, as I have a bit of time left, there are time zones on Mars. They are not relevant at the moment because the different landing missions do not interact with one another. So the landing missions, as all the space missions, are actually observing the time zone of the control center. because that's much easier for the people working down on Earth, because most of the time there is no one working up there. So that's what's happening there. I would really appreciate if you could give me feedback on Joined In. You find the link on the Joined In page of the conference. And if you don't have any questions anymore, thank you very much.